There are storms in Wyoming that build themselves slowly. Gray clouds gathering on the horizon for hours, the wind picking up by degrees, the temperature dropping in a way that gives a man time to read the signs and find shelter before the worst of it arrives. Those are the honest storms, the ones that give fair warning. And then there are the other kind. The blizzard that hit the Northern Territory on the 14th of January, 1879, was the other kind. It came out of Canada with no introduction and no courtesy, a wall of white that swallowed the sky in less than an hour and turned the world into something unrecognizable. Men who had lived in Wyoming their entire lives said afterward that they had never seen anything come on so fast, that the air had changed between one breath and the next, that the horizon had simply disappeared. The snow came sideways. The wind had a sound to it that went beyond weather, a low, sustained howl that pressed against windows and found every crack in every wall, and made even the most seasoned frontiermen pull their coats a little tighter and say quiet, private things they would deny saying later. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 2 hours. The road that connected the town of Harlow's Crossing to the outlying ranches disappeared entirely beneath 3 feet of snow and then kept going. It was into the absolute white obliteration of everything, that a horse and rider appeared on the ridge above Bitter Creek Road at 4 in the afternoon. The rider was Callum Reid, and he should not have been out there at all. Callum Reid was 36 years old and owned more land in the northern Wyoming Territory than any other private individual, a fact spoken of with the particular mixture of respect and resentment that extreme wealth tends to generate in places where most people have very little. The Reid Ranch covered 40,000 acres of prime grazing territory, carried the largest cattle operation in the county, and employed 32 men year-round. The main house was the largest private residence within 100 miles, built from timber and stone, with the particular solidity of a man who intends to stay. He had been born the 5th son of a struggling immigrant farmer in a 2-room cabin 12 miles from where the ridge now stood. He had started working at 11, saved every dollar he made, bought his first 50 acres at 19, and spent 17 years building something his father, dead of overwork at 52, had never believed was possible. He was not a man who wore his wealth loudly. His clothes were good but not showy. He did not frequent the saloon, did not gamble, did not seek the company of people who were primarily interested in what he owned. He was in the way of men who have built everything themselves and lost things along the way, deeply private, dark-haired, with gray eyes that had the quality of winter sky and a jaw that suggested both stubbornness and reliability. He had never married. This was the subject of considerable speculation in Harlow's Crossing. Every matchmaking effort in the county had been turned aside with a politeness that left no room for argument. He had his reasons. He kept them to himself. On the 14th of January, he had written out to check the fence line, a job he could have sent any of his men to do. He had been caught by the blizzard on the return ride when Tide stopped without instruction. It was Tide who found her first. The gelding pulled up short without instruction, ears flat, head dropping towards something in the snow just off the road. A shape that was not the right shape for a rock or a fallen branch. Callum dismounted into snow up to his knees and fought his way forward and found a woman. She was curled on her side in the snow, her back against a boulder that had given her some minimal shelter from the wind. She was wearing a coat entirely insufficient for a blizzard, the kind you wore to town on a winter morning when you expected to be indoors again before noon. Her boots were soaked through. She had no hat. Her dark hair was matted with snow and ice. Her lips were the particular shade of blue that a man who has spent his life in Wyoming winters recognizes immediately and never forgets. She was alive. Barely. He could see the shallow, labored movement of her breathing, each breath an effort, each one slower than the last. He got his arms under her and lifted her. She weighed less than he expected, which told him something about her circumstances, even in that moment. Getting her onto the saddle was not easy. But Callum Reid had been doing hard things his entire life, and he did this one with the focused efficiency of a man who understands there is no margin for error. He wrapped his coat around her from behind, adding his body heat to whatever warmth she had left. He turned tide south, and he rode. At one point her hand, which had been limp against the saddle horn, moved, just slightly, as if some part of her that had not yet given up was reaching for something to hold on to. "I've got you," he said into the wind. "You're all right. I've got you." Her name was Eliza Harte, and she was 30 years old, and she had been in Wyoming for exactly 11 days when the blizzard found her. She had come from Ohio, from a small city life of school teaching and careful savings, and a future that had seemed, until very recently, perfectly adequately mapped out. She had a position secured at the school in Harlow's Crossing, starting in February. What she had not had when she arrived in Wyoming was any understanding of what the land out here was actually capable of. Ohio winters were cold. Wyoming winters were a different category of thing entirely, a different philosophical proposition about the relationship between human beings and the natural world. She had been staying at the boarding house in Harlow's Crossing when a note arrived from the Purcell family 3 miles east of town, whose eldest daughter had been her student back in Ohio. The note said the weather looked fine for the morning. The weather had looked fine for the morning. It had stopped looking fine approximately 40 minutes after Eliza had left town on foot. The storm had come on so fast that she had not had time to turn back before the road disappeared. When her legs had finally given out and she had found the boulder and sat down against it, she had known, with the clear, terrible clarity of a person whose mind is still working, even as their body is failing, that she was in serious trouble. She had not given up. She kept saying her own name to herself to stay present. Eliza Harte, school teacher, Ohio, books. The last thing she remembered before the darkness came was the sound of a horse. She woke
The
to
rain
warmth,
sounds so peaceful.
not
It
the
is.
gradual,
Rest
uncertain
now.
warmth
I
of
will.
a body slowly recovering, but a deep, enveloping warmth that came from blankets and fire, and the particular quality of a room that has been heated by a large hearth for a very long time. The ceiling above her was timber, heavy dark beams crossing a high ceiling. The room was larger than any bedroom she had ever occupied, simply furnished, but with the quality of things chosen carefully. A fire burned in a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. Outside the window, the blizzard was still going, white and howling and entirely indifferent to the fact that she was no longer in it. She turned her head. An older woman sat in a chair by the fire, knitting with the calm efficiency of someone who knits the way other people breathe. "You're awake," the woman said without looking up. "Good. That's the correct direction. The ridge. Callum Reid's ranch," the woman said. "You were found on Bitter Creek Road. Another 20 minutes, and you'd have been a very sad discovery come spring." She poured broth and brought it to Eliza. It was the most welcome thing Eliza had ever tasted in her life. "The man who found me," she said. "Mr. Reid." The woman sat back down. "He carried you in himself, sat in that chair beside you for 2 hours, making sure you were breathing regularly before he went to deal with the rest of his evening." A pause. He's not generally a demonstrative man, but he was concerned. Eliza looked at the chair beside her bed. It was a plain wooden chair, solidly built. Someone had sat in it for 2 hours, watching her breathe. She didn't know what to do with that information, so she filed it away carefully and drank her broth. The blizzard lasted 3 days. On the first morning, Eliza could not stand without assistance. On the second, she could stand, but not walk without holding the wall. On the third, she made it to the kitchen under her own power and found it occupied by a man she recognized, despite never having properly seen his face. She recognized him by the coat, hanging by the door, a large man's coat, dark, that she had been wrapped in during the ride she barely remembered. The man himself was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, looking out at the white landscape with the expression of a man doing several kinds of thinking at once. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair slightly disheveled. He turned when he heard her, and she saw the gray eyes and the jaw she had been told was stubborn, and she thought, yes, that's accurate on both counts. "Miss Harte," he said. His voice was the same as the one from the storm, low, direct, carrying no excess. "Mr. Reid," she said. She had thought carefully about what she would say when this moment came. She set all of it aside and said the simple, true thing. "You saved my life." He looked at her steadily. "Tide found you. I just rode." "You didn't have to stop." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." She held his gaze. "Why did you?" He considered the question with the seriousness with which he appeared to consider everything. "Because you were there," he said finally. "Because leaving someone in a blizzard isn't something a person does and then goes home and sleeps well." He picked up his coffee. "Are you hungry?" Margaret left things on the stove. She sat down at the kitchen table of the richest man in the territory and ate salt pork and biscuits and drank coffee that was better than any she had tasted in Ohio, and felt, for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, that she might actually be all right in this place. The blizzard gave them 3 days. 3 days in which the world outside the ridge was entirely impassable, and the world inside it was warm and well-stocked, and surprisingly, quietly good. She discovered that he read, seriously, extensively, across a range of subjects that surprised her. The library at the Ridge contained more books than the schoolhouse in Harlow's Crossing, and they were not decorative books. They were read books, with the look of volumes that have been opened many times and thought about carefully. He discovered that she had opinions, strong ones, delivered without apology on subjects ranging from the education of children to the management of land. He found, to his own surprise, that he did not want her to stop talking, that her voice in a room that had been largely silent for years was not an intrusion, but something closer to the opposite. On the second evening, sitting by the fire while the blizzard howled outside, he said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone frightened," he said, "after what happened." "I was frightened," she said. "I'm still frightened, in certain ways, but being frightened and being diminished by it are different things. I've been frightened before. I've learned that it passes, and that who you are on the other side of it is worth paying attention to." He was quiet for a moment. "Who are you on the other side of this one?" She considered it genuinely. "Someone who knows what Wyoming is now," she said. "Someone who knows that strangers can be kinder than you expect." He looked at her across the firelight, and something shifted between them, something quiet and significant, without announcement, without drama, just a door opening that had been closed for a long time on both sides. On the 4th day, the blizzard broke, and the road became passable, and Callum Reid drove Eliza Harte back to Harlow's Crossing in his wagon. By sundown, the entire town knew. The schoolteacher from Ohio had been stranded at the Ridge for 3 days with Callum Reid. The whispers were not entirely unkind, but whispers are whispers, and small towns are small towns, and the arithmetic of the situation was the kind that people in small towns feel compelled to complete out loud. Eliza heard the whispers. She had spent years in the company of people who thought they were being quiet, and were not. She noted them with the calm detachment of a woman who had decided that other people's arithmetic was not her problem. What occupied her mind was something simpler and more personal. She had been in that man's house for 3 days. She had sat across from him at a kitchen table, and by a fire, and in a library. She had watched him move through a space that was entirely his own, with the ease of a man completely at home in his own life. And she had found, without planning to, without quite noticing the moment it happened, that she was looking forward to seeing him again in a way that was distinct from general social anticipation. More specific, more personal, the kind of looking forward that arrives quietly and then refuses to leave. She reported for her teaching position on the 1st of February, as planned, threw herself into the work with the dedication that had always been her best quality, and told herself that whatever she was feeling would resolve itself in time. He came to town on the 7th of February, and the 14th, and the 21st. Each time he had business, legitimate ranch business, the kind that required a man of his operation to be in town regularly. Each time the business concluded, he found himself, through what appeared to be coincidence but was not entirely coincidence, in the vicinity of the schoolhouse around the hour when school let out. The second time, he asked if she would like to walk. They walked the length of the main street and back, talking about books, specifically a book they had both read and disagreed about in a way that was so enjoyable that they were both slightly startled when they reached the end of the street and discovered there was no more street to walk. The third time, he asked if she would have supper with him at the hotel dining room. She said yes. At the end of the evening, standing outside on the cold February street, she looked at him and said, "You know what people are saying." "Yes," he said. "Does it concern you?" He looked at her with those winter gray eyes. "What concerns me is considerably more specific than what people are saying." She waited. "What concerns me," he said, "is whether you intend to stay in Wyoming." She thought about Ohio, the careful life, the sufficient future. She thought about the blizzard and the boulder and the cold darkness closing in. She thought about a coat wrapped around her and a voice saying, "I've got you," like it was simply a fact. "I think," she said slowly, "that Wyoming has a way of becoming necessary, whether you planned for it or not." Something in his expression opened, just enough. "I think that's true," he said, "for places and for people." They were married in April, when the snow had finally retreated from the lower elevations, and the first green was showing on the ridge, and Wyoming was doing what Wyoming does in spring, reminding everyone who had survived the winter why they had bothered. The ceremony was in the church in Harlow's Crossing, which was full. Eliza wore a dress the color of winter sky, because winter sky was the color of the eyes that had found her in the storm. Callum stood at the front of the church with the expression of a man who has been reserved and private for 36 years and has arrived, finally, at the place where that reserve is no longer necessary and is discovering with some relief that he is glad to set it down. She walked down the aisle and he watched her come, and there was nothing complicated in his expression. Just a man looking at a woman he intended to spend his life with. Outside after, in the April sunshine, Callum took her hand and said, "When Tide found you, I kept thinking about the fact that I almost didn't ride out that day. I almost sent one of the men 2 inches to the left on that road, and I would have ridden right past you." She thought about the mathematics of it, the fraction of a difference that separates the life you get from the life you almost got. "But you didn't ride past," she said. "No, you stopped." "Yes." She looked at him. "Why do you think that is?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think some things are meant to be found," he said, "and that the people who are supposed to find them get put in the right place at the right time, even when they don't know that's what's happening." She had been dying alone in a blizzard. He had stopped his horse. And neither one of them, not on that day, not on any of the long good days that came after, ever rode away.